to the next part of your project. Lovely to have you with me again. We've been through so much so far, haven't we? We've talked about design, we've talked about how to get it onto your paper, practical techniques for inking in, choosing colours and choosing materials. So this is finally, we're getting to the really interesting part now where we get to put colour onto your final piece. And I'm going to do this in a couple of stages for you so that it doesn't seem too scary or too overwhelming. I'm using watercolour and I'm using some felt tip pens, and they are pretty transparent. And so what that means is that if I layered up the colours, you'd probably be able to see the one underneath through it. Now that piece of information is important because it helps when you're using transparent paint to start with the thing that's furthest away and build it up to the thing that's closest to you. So for example, probably the trickiest part of this whole painting is going to be the background because it's a big area. I want to get it on so that it's not going to be super smooth because that is too difficult. I'm going to put a little bit of texture in there, and then I can put other things on the top. So it means that if my background creeps in a little bit to one of the other shapes where I don't really want it to, I can either use a bit of kitchen roll to lift that out, or I can paint over the top of it, and then you won't see that particular issue. So let's start off with the background. Now you choose whatever colour. You might have a smaller area than me, you might have a larger area than me. You might be doing it in a different way and you might be using a coloured pencil to do it. If you are doing it that way, may I suggest that you build it up in lots of very light layers. Try not to go in and colour it in the depth of colour that you want it to, because you'll get funny marks in the background. Because I'm using paint, what I need to make sure that I do is to mix up enough colour, and I've got a palette here to do that. You don't need a fancy palette whatsoever. It could be a plate, just needs to be a pale colour so that you can make sure that you can see it nice and clearly. And then I'm going to make sure that I mix up enough so that I'm not having to go back to my palette too many times, so that if I run out of colour, it's not a different one when I get it on there. That's the tricky part of painting, really. Understanding how much colour you need and how much you need on your brush to be able to do it. So if you've watched previous parts of this, then you will know that one of my decisions was to use a nice pale lilac-y violet kind of colour for my background. So I'm going to make a really big puddle of it over here on my palette. And if you've got that little scrap of paper, do you remember that scrap of paper that we've been using to test our colours on? If this is your first time that you have come across this project, there's lots of sections that happen before this. Please do go back and watch any of those before you stop off here. So I've got that little scrap of paper where I was playing around and testing various bits of materials out. So I'm going to test that colour on there just to see if it's what I want. Now, I don't think that's strong enough for me. I don't want it to be a lot stronger, but certainly a touch stronger would be good. Now, have I got enough is the million-dollar question. My piece of advice is mix up more than you need. It's never going to be a problem where you go, oh, I had too much. It's a huge problem if you get halfway through and you run out of colour. I usually say mix double the amount that you need, and then that's probably going to be about right. And so let's just pop you into that close-up shot so that you can see how I apply it. So there's my colour. I've got it loaded up with a brush. I'm not just tipping the ends of my brush in the colour. That's not going to help me at all. I need to load up my brush with that colour, and I might just have to move my palette out of the way to be able to twist this piece of paper ever so slightly. Let's just move some things around. I've got my kitchen roll in my non-painting hand, and I am going to go for it. So I'm going to start in the top left-hand corner. Now, this paint is making a texture on the paper. That isn't because there's something wrong with the paper. That's because the combination of this particular brand of paper that I'm using and type and brand of paint that I am using is making that kind of what we call a granulated pattern occur. I really like it as a pattern. You may not, and that's absolutely fine and dandy. In which case other combinations might suit you better, but I quite like it. I just think it looks very watercolory, which isn't a word, but it's certainly a consideration in your painting. Now, one of the things that you might have noticed there while I was talking, that when I put the colour down next to some of these pen lines, it was almost as if the pen line was pushing the colour away, and it was. Sometimes the alcohol in those pens repels the paint a little bit, and so you kind of have to persuade it to get right up to the line. So you can see I'm waggling my brush backwards and forwards. You see there, it's kind of repelling, so I persuade it otherwise and move it where I need it. Now, the other thing that you might have noticed is that I'm working my way along the shape as I go. And that is because I don't want to get a tide mark. I don't want my paint to dry and create like a little stain mark. So I'm sort of having to sweep along a bit like a typewriter to make sure that I address all sections at the same time. And that can be quite scary because you might have to work a little faster than you anticipated. But keep it moving, keep going back. You can see that I put quite a puddle of colour down onto my shape. That is to buy me time so that when I go back to it, excuse me, it's still wet. If I go back to that bit of colour and it has dried out, that is when I'm going to get a tide mark. So I'm moving it backwards and forwards. I'm not worrying too much about sort of enclosed spaces because I can deal with those in a minute. What I'm more concerned about are those shapes where I need it to flow very definitely from one to the next. So let's go back. My recommendation as well is that you don't work anywhere too warm for this part of it, as daft as it sounds, because your paint may just dry too quickly. So waggling my brush backwards and forwards to try to persuade it. See what a lovely texture I've got there now? And going back in over here. In some places, I'm pushing the brush right down onto the surface so that I get it to cover really well. And in some places, I'm using just the tip of it to make sure that I get into the nooks and crannies. If your brush hasn't got a very fine point on it, you could always put a little blob of colour down and then use something like a cocktail stick to push it into the space where you need it to go. There's never a sort of a right and a wrong way of doing this. There's just different tools for different applications. So I nearly forgot that bit over there. I got sidetracked. So I need to make sure that I get that nice and into the corner. And then I'm almost ready to join up, aren't I? I'm going back and I'm mixing my colour all the time. And if I need to take care of it, if I think there's too much paint on my brush, then I'll use my kitchen roll just to kind of take off the excess so that it's not running away with me. So we're almost at the join. In fact, we've joined up at the bottom now. And now I can go back round and get it into that last main area. I don't need to worry about these because they're little enclosed areas that I can go back and deal with in a second. I am very, very aware of sticking my hand back in it right now. I can paint over the antenna. I don't need to worry about painting in between those lines because I know that my pen is waterproof. And I can always re-ink it. So I need to just take a bit of colour off there. It's running away with me. I can always re-ink them if I need to. So coming back over, don't rush, Ali. Big deep breath to get it into the last part of that shape. And then what I've got is that lovely soft background. It's got a little bit of a funny shape up there. And I got it down in one. We've got a bit of a funny shape in there as well. It's just where that pen has repelled it. And I shouldn't really, particularly with watercolour, go back and poke it around too much, because the danger is that I might make it worse. But I think I'm okay. So let's take care of this section in the middle. Now, if it hasn't quite worked for you, don't worry. All of these things are really, I promise you, they're just practice. If it's a bit pale when you've put it on and you're a tiny bit disappointed, dry it all off and then put a second layer on it, exactly as you would do if you were painting a wall in your house. Just popping a second layer on will be absolutely fine. If you're using watercolour, you might disturb the first layer, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, particularly if you're putting the same colour back over the top. So I've got these last little sections going in, which are probably fiddlier than the big section going around the outside. I'm just making sure that I've got enough on my brush to fill in the shape without it running away with me. And I'm getting that last little section in, and I am pretty pleased with that. I didn't think it was going to go as well as that. I should trust myself, shouldn't I? Now, I can't put the letter in yet. I need to dry that so that that is completely dry, so that my colour doesn't smush. So I'm going to give this a really good dry, and we'll come back together in a second to complete the letter. There you go, it's lovely and dry. Look how beautiful that colour's come out. That is a combination of the paint that I used and this lovely soft watercolour paper. I'm really pleased with that. Sort of sums me up as well, that colour. Now I'm going to repeat the process with the darker violet for the A. That is definitely a colour I'm going to need to get right. So we'll repeat the process. So we'll go over here to my palette. We'll pick up a bit of colour and we'll make sure, I sort of want it Goldilocks-like. I want it dark enough that it contrasts against the other elements, but I don't want it so dark that it looks black. So we'll go back to our little test piece of paper and we'll run that over the surface. And I think that is going to be about right. Maybe a tiny touch more water in there. It's a bit like baking this. You kind of have to, a light touch, and I think that's going to be a bit better. We'll soon see. Maybe. Yes, let's go for it. Let's go for it. Let's take you back into that close-up camera so that you can see what I'm up to. And I'm going to switch to a slightly smaller brush for this so that I have control, because I've got a very fine line to tackle. Now, where I start with this is going to need some thought. If I start up here, I'm going to have to run a large area and a fine area all at the same time, which I'm not thrilled about doing. I think it's going to be better actually if I start in this bottom corner, get those fine lines done first, and then try to get all of that done in one. I think that is going to be a better option for me. So brush into the colour, and I'm rolling the brush to bring it to the nice fine point that I've got. My head's just got to get in a little closer. Now, that colour straight away, I can see as it goes down, is not as dark as I would like it. I think maybe I was a bit hesitant on my test piece of paper, which just goes to show that even if you test it, you don't necessarily get it right. Let's try that again. I haven't gone too far, so I think I'm going to be okay. That is more what I had in mind. I should have stuck to my guns, shouldn't I, in the mixing? So what that proves is that you can have all the knowledge in the world and still, until you actually get it, onto the surface, you're never quite sure. Now this is a right proper challenge to get this line fine enough. And I am going to have to do some work to that later on, I think, to tidy it up, but that's okay. That's okay. Let's not panic yet. Lay my brush down to try to join that out. I don't have to make it perfect. We've got some techniques near the end of this project to make it tidier. Let's get the colour to run. That's much more important. There we go. We're getting there. It's bled a little bit into the surroundings of the paper, but I can tidy that up later on. I know I can. Ooh, that was a bit hold your breath moment. Try not to stick my hand back in it. Let's go back into the main body. I'm just going to move some of these elements so I can get my hand in. Let's fill that. Ooh, just got outside the line. Actually, let's use just the corner of my kitchen roll. I've gone just outside the line there. Let's use my kitchen roll to mop that up. I realise that I'm being fantastically picky, but I think I need to be picky. I'm really pleased with my background, so I need to be as picky with my background as I am with the other elements. Now, this is interesting. This is drying at slightly different rates. Can you see that this part has already dried? I think if I start to go back and poke that around, I'm going to be in trouble. So I'm going to leave it alone. And if it needs a second coat, then I'll do it. But what I really don't want to happen is that by putting a second layer on, I somehow disturb what's already gone down. So I'm just going to have to make my peace with that. Run my brush around this section, waggling it in so that it goes right up to the pen line. Just a little bit over. Mop that up with the kitchen roll. I think what I need to do is give it a 180 so that I can get the point. There we go, that's much better. I can get the point to tackle that shape rather than another bit of my brush. So we'll go in there. It's running away with me a bit now, so I'm going to take some of that colour off my brush. And then all I've got to do is that tiny last little section in there. There we go. And so we've got the main body of the A and my background sorted. What I'm going to do is I'm going to very lightly dry this just to see what happens with that part as to whether I need a second coat. Let's give it a waggle. Good idea to keep the warm air moving rather than focusing it. Otherwise it might end up with a funny colour or funny tide mark maybe. Now I can already see that it's all drying out the same. So that's good news, isn't it? I don't think I'm going to need to put a second coat on that. Let's turn up the heat a little bit. There we go. So it's dried more even than I thought it was going to. And let's have a look at it in the context of all of it. It's that lovely dusky purple that I was really hoping for. It's standing out over the background. So I think for the time being, I'll be really pleased with how that has come together. And then in the next part, let's join up again so that we can paint in some of the more decorative elements. Join me in the next part.